landing a 747, you want to know that you can trust that the runway is solid and that you have certain, fixed space-time coordinates. This is not a good time to explore your past life in ancient Egypt. This is not a good time to have an out-of-body experience to San Francisco. You really want to be in the situation. On the other hand, if you spend your life just in the holotropic state, it's very difficult to find any meaning in life. You are a piece of flesh going from conception to death. Whatever you create sooner or later is going to be destroyed. You're going to get old and die. You spend your life like Arnold Schwarzenegger pumping iron, and then at the end there is a senile marasm, or like myself, spending hundreds or thousands of hours in libraries reading books, and then realizing that at the end I won't be able to remember what I had for dinner last night. So there's a sense of futility in that kind of a so-called normal worldview in Western civilization. So you have to transcend that, and that comes in the deeper meaning comes in the holotropic states. So if we want to find deeper meaning in life, if we want to do healing, not body mechanics, we can do very good body mechanics in the holotropic state, but healing always happens in a holotropic state. If you look at the healing ceremonies of shamans or of native cultures and so on, those always involve the healing potential of these holotropic states. If we want to tap deeper sources of inspiration, again, we can do good job in the holotropic state, but some of the major breakthroughs, paradigm-changing breakthroughs, usually come in holotropic states. There's a very interesting book by Willis Harman, the former president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, called Higher Creativity. We have a tremendous list of situations in which major scientific breakthroughs, religious inspiration, artistic inspiration came through non-ordinary states. You know the Kekule example, which was the beginning of organic chemistry, the idea of the benzene ring. You know the story? Yeah. Mozart said that whole symphonies appeared in his head in a finished form. Puccini said he didn't write Madame Butterfly, it was God who wrote it. He was just holding the pen. It just sort of came through. Ideas for Nobel Prize winning projects, came from these kinds of non-ordinary states, including discoveries in quantum physics and so on. Einstein's discovery of theory of relativity and so on. Also, if we want to cultivate intuition, if we want to cultivate extrasensory perception, that would be happening in the holotropic states. So the intellect functions in a very different way. We can, for example, have the experience of becoming an animal, identifying with an animal, and we can find new information about that animal, which goes way beyond anything that we have learned in this lifetime. So, and completely different way of getting to know the universe, it becomes available in a non-ordinary state. Usually we use our senses, we observe, we analyze, we synthesize. In a non-ordinary state, we learn by becoming something, by becoming animals, by becoming other people, by becoming part of a mythology. Jung, had the concept of the collective unconscious because he saw that in psychiatric patients, mythologies of other cultures can come through. Cultures that they have never studied, that they didn't even know existed. So the whole idea of the collective unconscious in its archetypal, mythological way comes from these non-ordinary states. There are also powerful physical manifestations. Again, a big spectrum, where on one side there could be a sense of incredible well-being, physical vitality, enormous amount of energy that becomes available. On the other side of the spectrum, we can experience ourselves as dying, or we can experience, extreme pains. We can experience suffocation when we are reliving birth and so on. So those are the this is the phenomenology of these holotropic states. Now, there are many ways we can induce them. We had, about 5 years ago, we had a conference of the International Transpersonal Association in Manaus, which was called Technologies of the Sacred, Ancient, Aboriginal, and Modern, where we were exploring experientially and intellectually different ways of inducing these holotropic states. So there were shamans from different South American states. There were the Santo Daime people who work with ayahuasca, the Unio de Vegetal people who also work with ayahuasca. There were the Spiritists, there were the Umbanda people. We did a large holotropic breathwork pre-conference workshop, Jungians talking about active imagination and so on. So there are many, many of these techniques, some of them developed by shamans, by native cultures, using drumming, rattling, work with sticks, gongs, bells, fasting, extreme physical pain, dancing, drumming, things involving breathing, psychedelic plants, and so on. And they all have been used in different combinations as part of ritual and spiritual life. Obviously, we would not have religions if it were not for these holotropic states. At the beginning, at the cradle of all major religions, were visionary experiences of the prophets, of the saints, of the founders of the religion, and also of the early disciples. So religion began from visionary experiences. Now, when it becomes an organized religion, that's a whole other story. Very frequently, the religion loses the connection to the spiritual source and becomes involved in politics, in secular things, concerned about controlling people, possessions, hierarchies, and so on. So there's a major difference between spirituality, which is a direct experience of these normally invisible dimensions of reality, which is a very private thing. It's between me and the universe and based on personal experience, and then there is religion. Not everything that's religious is spiritual, not everything that's spiritual is religious. So this is related, what I'm discussing is related to spirituality, and that is found primarily in the mystical branches of the religions or in the monastic branches where people actually do practice. They fast, they are sleep deprived, they meditate, they pray, and so on. Religion frequently doesn't involve any non-ordinary experiences. If in today's church somebody would have really a full-blown mystical experience, your average priest probably calls the ambulance and would think that that kind of thing doesn't belong to church. It's okay to talk about what happened to people 2,000 years ago, but those experiences today are not acceptable. There's psychiatrists kind of in cahoots with mainstream religions. They agree on that. So those are the ancient methods, the aboriginal methods, and then of course we have a number of methods now contributed by modern psychiatry. Now we have isolated most of the alkaloids from the plants. We have mescaline, we have psilocybin, psilocin, we have the tryptamine derivatives, we have the THC from cannabinol, and so on. We've also experimented with not only sleep deprivation, but also dream deprivation, lucid dreaming. We have experimented with sensory isolation, sensory deprivation. Some professionals develop kinesthetic devices like Avram Kaufman's rotating couch. Gene Houston and Bob Masters recreated the witch's cradle that the medieval witches used to get into a trance state, and so on. So there's a large spectrum of these methods of inducing these experiences. Now, there's a tremendous difference between the industrial civilization and all the pre-industrial cultures, the ancient and pre-industrial native cultures. Difference in worldview. Now, obviously, we know much more about the material world than these cultures ever knew. We have in terms of technology, understanding of material processes. There's no comparison. But that's not surprising. You wouldn't expect that after hundreds of years of accumulation of information. We have books where we can pass information. So in that sense, it's not surprising. But there is another difference which is surprising, and which is in regard to the spiritual dimension. All the ancient and aboriginal cultures, without exception, believe that there are dimensions of reality that are ordinarily invisible. They believe that consciousness, in some sense, is superior to matter, that consciousness does not end with death. There is posthumous journey. There are these different abodes of the blessed and the doomed, and so on. There's reincarnation, metempsychosis, and so on. Whereas for the Western industrial civilization, at least for its sort of main spokesman, this is a material universe. The history of the universe is the history of developing matter. Much of it happened without any participation of consciousness, without any participation of creative intelligence. It happened in a very small, infinitesimal part of the universe after billions of years of development that a life originated. And then within life, then consciousness as the epiphenomenon of the neurophysiological processes in the brain, and then intelligence. So in that kind of worldview, there's absolutely no place for spirit. So to be spiritual from a strictly materialistic psychiatric perspective is to be primitive, to be uneducated, to be gullible, to be into primitive thinking, primary process. Now, if it happens to somebody who's intelligent, like people like in the category of Einstein or Bohr and so on, the idea is you probably have some unfinished business from your childhood. You are carrying some kind of infantile images of your parents, and you're projecting it out there and making sort of gods and goddesses out of them. And when somebody has spiritual experiences, then we give them diagnosis and we put them on tranquilizers. There's a fundamental difference between these two groups of people, all the pre-industrial cultures and the industrial civilization, in relation to spirituality. Now, the usual interpretation is that they didn't have science. We have sort of superior materialistic scientific understanding. The way I would see it after working 45 years with these states is that it has something to do with the relationship with these holotropic states. That all these pre-industrial and ancient cultures held these states in very high esteem. They spent a lot of time and energy developing powerful and effective and safe ways of inducing them, and they were regularly practicing them. So they were having their sort of everyday maintenance activities, and then once in a while they would have a ritual where a group of people or the whole tribe would go into a non-ordinary state, and they would experience these kinds of states, holotropic states that I'm talking about, and they're so powerful, so convincing, that once you have them, you have to build them into your worldview. There's no way you can ignore that kind of experience. It would be like talking me out of the fact that there's a microphone here. I mean, I can see it, I have a very real experience. So if people have past life experiences or they have experience of the divine, just encountering archetypal beings, mythological beings, those are very, very powerful types of experiences. So I see the difference now being based on the naivete of the industrial civilization in relation to these holotropic states. While the native cultures all were using them all through their life, and they combined in their worldview the experience from the hylotropic and the holotropic, we have eliminated this holotropic dimension out of our life. We discourage these kinds of experiences. We have even outlawed some of the means and some of the contexts. And when people have spontaneous experiences, we consider it to be pathology across the board, and we suppress them. So we don't have information coming from that domain.